Let's talk a little bit more about these ants. Welcome back to Bug of the Week, Part 20, brought to you by Lil Dudes Insect Academy. If you are new here, consider subscribing, dropping a like, leaving a comment, and maybe even donating to the Academy. All those things help us out a lot. And another thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is that I have a free podcast online as well. So if you guys want to go more in depth and actually hear from people who study all of these insects, then head over to that podcast. I interview real life entomologists who work on these things as their job. And it's super cool to hear from these people who do this stuff all the time and work with these animals for their job every single day. So if you want to learn from entomologists around the world, definitely go check out that. It'll be in one of the links in the description of this episode, but it's free online on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to great podcasts. So last week I wasn't able to properly cover all about the leafcutter ant. And like I said at the end of that episode, I could talk about these guys for literal hours. So let's continue our discussion about them. If you haven't watched that episode, definitely go back. You can click on it right up here. I'll leave a little card up there, but definitely go check that out before you watch this one if you haven't already. I went over the caste system of the colony, as well as their jobs and the culture of subterranean fungus that they propagate in their colony. Like I said last time, I kind of just went over the roles of these ants within the colony, but I didn't get to go over the anatomy of each one individually. So let's start with the males. So the males are very large and bulky, and they have wings, which is quite unique for ants. And they also have very small heads because they don't cut leaves or really eat much. They kind of just live to go and mate with queens and then die. So speaking of the queens are very large and stout, and they actually start with wings, but then drop them off after they've mated. And I talked about that a little bit in the last one. They have very simple mouth parts because they have to be fed by other workers. So they can't cut leaves, they can't really chew, so they're fed by the workers through trophallaxis. They're also the only sexually mature females in the colony, so they're the only ones who can reproduce. All the other workers are also female, but they can't reproduce. Next are the minor workers. They have very long, stocky legs, and they also have spines all over their body. And they also have very large, muscly heads with serrated mandibles for cutting the leaves. When you look at a leafcutter ant, they're definitely unique, and they don't really look like any other worker ant from any other species. Next up are the major workers, and I explained that there are a few other workers, like the minims, but all those other workers kind of look similar to the minor workers. So next are the major workers, the super big guys. So also known as the soldiers, they're the largest by far. They're very spiky, even more so than the minors. They have very large heads, and they have large but dull mandibles. They also have very small eyes proportionally to their head, and they're really the most fit for transporting heavy loads and protecting the colony. I do want to note that none of these ants actually have stingers, but they mostly defend themselves using mandibles and their huge numbers, so they kind of overwhelm any predators. So secondly, let's talk about some of the things that the ants do to care for their crop, their prized fungus. So like I mentioned in the previous video, these ants actually cultivate their own food source, their own crop of fungus, and they eat it, they feed it with the leaves that they cut. And the minims are responsible for all things related to the care of their food crop. So these workers are in charge of feeding the fungus, caring for the fungus, and expanding the cavity of the fungus garden. So the most fascinating thing about the minims is that they have a small white patch on the front of their thorax, which sort of looks like a bow tie. And that is a small patch of beneficial microbial bacteria, which is a form of biological pesticide. So just like how farmers use pesticides to protect their crops, these ants do the same thing. So there are many pests such as parasitic bacteria and other funguses that are attracted to the ant's fungus crop. And so this white patch is actually a bacterial weapon against these pests of their precious food source. In fact, many researchers are actually starting to develop more effective and ethical antibiotics for humans using these bacterial cultures as an outline for that. Lastly, I wanted to go over this airborne fungus spore which attacks the ants, turning them into zombies. This is Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, commonly known as the mutant ant fungus. It is what is known as an insect pathogenic fungus which has airborne spores. So when a spore finds a lonely and unfortunate ant host, it enters the ant's body through the mouth. The spore then lodges itself into the brain of the ant, taking control of its body and leading it to the rest of the colony, just like a zombie. Once the zombie ant has reached the colony, the spore quickly metabolizes into the fruiting body form of the fungus, sprouting from the head of the ant, instantly killing it. This fruiting body then spreads more spores, infecting more ants while feeding on countless ants in the process. This fungus actually infects many species of ants, not just leafcutter ants, and as well as many other small insect species such as grasshoppers. Now you might be thinking to yourself, what if these could affect humans? Well, luckily these spores are never large or complex enough to affect humans in any way, or even any vertebrates. So although there is actually an entire video game franchise based on that concept, it will never happen and it's impossible. So if you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend, leaving a like, subscribing like I mentioned, and go check out all of our other links down below like social media and whatnot. So I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about leafcutter ants. Like I said last episode, these are definitely one of my favorites. They're just so complex and have so many unique traits like farming their own food. It's just crazy. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will see you all next week, and keep on bugging.